Hey, this is Rich Christiansen, Win the Day with James Whittaker.
You're listening to Win the Day with James Whittaker.
What we doing live echoes in eternity.
Broadcasting from Los Angeles, California. Here's your host, James Whittaker.
Let's go!
Hey winners, welcome back to Win the Day. The quote for this episode comes from William James and says, "Acceptance of what has happened is the first step to overcoming the consequences of any misfortune." Rich Christiansen is a globally recognized educator, entrepreneur, and mentor. He assists people in fearlessly facing their dragons, making peace with them, and navigating the intricate mazes of their lives. Rich has founded or co-founded more than 50 businesses, of which 16 have become multi-million-dollar success stories, and each of those businesses was capitalized with $10,000 or less. He is also the author of Wall Street Journal bestseller The Zigzag Principle, and his new book BlindSighted has just been released. Recently, Rich began to move away from building and stabilizing businesses to focus instead on securing our families and the relationships we have with ourselves. In this episode, we're going to talk about how to face and overcome your personal dragons, building resilience and success through family values, the secrets to starting a business with minimal capital, and how to align your values across life, family, and career. Before we begin, the right bit of inspiration can completely change the trajectory of someone's life. So if there's a friend or loved one out there who needs to hear this episode or could use some help to win the day, share it with them right now. All right, let's win the day with Rich Christiansen. Rich, great to see you, my friend. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. We got a lot to cover.
We do. We got a lot to talk about. And I want to give a shout out to our mutual friend, Garrett Gunderson, for putting us in touch. Garrett came on the show in episode 206. A great guy. So a big shout out to Garrett.
He is. Garrett's a dear friend and one of the individuals I mentored as a young man in an amazing impact career.
Yeah. So you got the real dirt on Garrett then.
He's amazing.
Well, to kick things off, you had such a unique upbringing. You want to take us into your childhood and how that helped shape your mindset?
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, that's a fun place to start. I grew up in a really amazing environment, very, I think, unique. 2,000 people in the little town I grew up, if you count the cows. And my father was blind, completely blind at the age of 5 years old. His eyes were removed due to retinoblastoma. And this was right in the middle of the Great Depression. My grandparents were living on a homestead and no running water, no electricity. And I had to make the terrible decision, do we let this little boy live or see, but then he'll die by the age of 8 as the cancer travels up the brainstem? Or do we give him a 1 in 20 chance and then he might live, but likely he won't, bringing him into the world blind? And so that was my father. He ended up having an eidetic memory. He did live, obviously. Eidetic memory was the longest elected public official in the state of Utah. He was an attorney, highest prosecution rate. My mother was a beauty queen, 15 years his junior, multiple marriage proposals, married my honorable father. I was their oldest son. So when most kids were running around, playing in the playground, I had bells on my shoes so my dad could find me. At 8 years old, I was tuning the carburetor with my dad's instructions. He was just so brilliant. He, kind of knew, and I was his eyes. So much of my world, and people said, Rich, you're able to see like 4 steps ahead and then behind the corner. And you create these, and I have. My whole career, I've created these just crazy, insightful models. And people say, why can you do that? Well, it's quite frankly, I was interpreting the world for my dad, always on the scan for challenges, and giving the visuals of my mother's art and the beautiful world verbally to my father.
Do you know that famous Napoleon Hill quote where he says that every adversity carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit? And it feels like they're having that adversity of being blind just means that it can heighten a lot of those senses. But he also passed that on to his children as well, which is such an incredible gift.
Well, I think oftentimes we feel a little regretful when we have a hard thing in our life. I think we got to stop doing that. And it's okay to actually face those emotions and go towards it and recognize, this is a hard thing, and maybe even stewing our juices in it for a few minutes. But we certainly don't need to camp and roast marshmallows over it, and I think that coming to the realization of this incredible gift in my life, but it was complicated. It was challenging. It was exceptionally difficult in many regards, but it also provided me just this amazing rocket fuel to create a pretty cool life.
So how does he pass the bar and become a successful lawyer while blind?
Well, he had an eidetic memory, which means if you were to say 6,437,327.467, he could recall that number, what I just said 30 years later. We didn't need Google in our home. We didn't need a phone book. We just asked Dad, and he could recite any phone number, any address, anything. So
that's like Mike Ross from the TV show Suits. Have you heard of that before?
Well, yeah, it's similar. It's almost like a Rain Man, almost that level of brilliance. And he would freak the judges out, freak the other attorneys out, because he was reciting case law that they'd never even heard of. So he was just vicious in the courtroom. He was a little bit like Data from Star Trek. There was no emotion in our house. If you showed up without the facts wrong, you're going to get eviscerated. And so from my father, I learned a deep logic and honor, and from my mother, art and loving and empathy. And so it was really a very interesting blend. My father was a Democrat. My mother was a Republican. And it was pretty interesting way to grow up.
So he's using Braille to learn. Obviously, to be a lawyer, you've got to consume such a massive amount of information.
No, he did. He'd write little punches, little things. As a matter of fact, when we'd play cards, he'd had Braille cards, and he'd fill the cards and then, pass them on and play. And but mostly he just used his brilliance. He just didn't need notes or a typewriter. He just used his memory.
Mm-hmm. And now that you're a father and grandfather yourself, what is the biggest fear that you have for your kids and grandkids as they grow up?
I'm really, really hopeful and optimistic, James. I really am hopeful about the future, and particularly as we establish these, value-rooted foundations for them and remove the broken pieces. So I'm really hopeful for them. Probably the biggest concern that I have is they can actually find themselves, and maybe the noise and the jitter of the world that we process is the biggest challenge we have. Taking those moments and finding those, Garrett calls it a power hour. I call it my private moments to actually really get my guidance. And I'm hoping that they'll be able to just get peace and confidence in this noisy, turbulent world.
Mm-hmm. And congrats on your new book as well. Just been released, BlindSighted. I know you've been a busy boy behind the scenes.
I have.
Taking care of all this stuff.
It's good to get done with that one.
You found this is such an interesting thing that happened in your life. You found out, or at least you felt, that so much of your life was based on a lie. So can you take us into how that happened and how your life changed as a result?
Well, again, it was a remarkable childhood. I don't consider myself in any way a victim. But it was a very interesting childhood. Always trying to prove. I could never quite actually get the full approval of my father. As a matter of fact, when I was 12, I went to my mom and says, I'm weird. It's like something's wrong with me. I like to create companies, and I'm always selling stuff, and I'm zippy, and I like to chase balls. And I just never could quite please my father, who was very logical and methodical and organized. And I wasn't. I was a creator. I was selling worms or melting down candles or selling seeds, and I couldn't help myself. So at the age of 40, my brother was 43, my youngest brother was 43, and I was 53. He took a DNA test because we had always jokingly kind of made some references that you don't look like our brother. He was dark and deliberate and really methodical and nothing like us other brothers. So he had this fun party where everyone guessed his ancestries and was going to prove that, hey, actually, he wasn't the milkman's son. And so he opened that up, and as he opened the letter up in front of 100 friends and family, it was revealed that he was 50% Ashkenazi Jew, which there is no Jewish heritage in our family. So it's like, what? Mom had died young of breast cancer. So she wasn't there to ask about it. One by one, as us brothers began taking a test, discovered that indeed we were half brothers. So at that point, we were faced with a pretty tricky dilemma. Did you go to your 93-year-old father and say, hey, Mom was getting some on the side? or do you just hold that secret? After long consideration, we just says, there's no way. Mom was just very religious and very proper and, really honorable that way. So we went to Dad, and he said, yeah, you caught us. This was going to be the first order of business in the life hereafter. I'll speak of this once, and then we'll never discuss it ever again. And so the following week, we went up to my cabin, and it was revealed that indeed his retinoblastoma was genetic. So he had made the decision to self-sterilize. This had broke Mom and Dad up, and then magically they got back together again. And I guess a very famous doctor had moved out from New York, Johns Hopkins, and Columbia to the University of Utah, and was practicing donor conception. And it turns out I was one of the very, very early donor-conceived kids. At this point, it was, quote, nefarious. It was also illegal, keeping in mind my father's the county attorney, so he's putting himself in jail over that one. And growing up in the Mormon or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, it was also excommunicatable. So my parents would have been thrown out of the church. To top it off, if my biological father had been identified, he would have been financially responsible for my upbringing. So it was just like the ultimate secret, James, the ultimate secret that was kept until age 53 years old. And at that point, I got the beautiful opportunity to reanalyze and put Humpty Dumpty back together again.
So this there seems to be a lot of people. Obviously, it probably coincides with the rise of all this DNA testing.
Yeah.
I'm seeing these stories more and more out there, which can be very, very confronting for people. At the same time, just because someone might have provided a sperm sample doesn't make them a father. You obviously had this person who was an incredible inspiration and presence in your life. So what did you learn about what it means to be a good father?
Well, my father, indeed, John Christiansen, I consider him every way my father. But DNA matters. I think I'm the ultimate test case of this, actually, because it's nature and nurture. And my biological father he was a famous doctor and a famous entrepreneur. As a matter of fact, he was the first abortion doctor in the state of Utah. And I happen to look exactly like him, express exactly like him, and every one of his biological children ended up being medical field doctors or entrepreneurs. My younger brother, Brett, also ended up being his biological son, and he's a doctor. I'm an entrepreneur. And it was in my DNA. I couldn't help it. He couldn't help it. And now as I've met these new half-bio siblings, they're almost spitting images, personality of what I am. My third brother, Vaughn, he could not stand to golf. He hated golf, but he loved to run. Matter of fact, he's ran like 25 some odd marathons, including the Boston Marathon. My brother Brett and I, it's like, all we wanted to do was golf and hit and cheese balls. Running, hit us over the head with a baseball bag. Don't make us run. Well, as this all came out, every one of Doc, my biological father's kids, are avid golfers and golf ball hunters. And every one of Vaughn's siblings have all ran the Boston Marathon. So you can't argue with the genetic component of it, but the nurturing part is also vitally important.
There's also that component of ignorance is bliss. Like, should people, if everything is okay at the moment in their lives, should people go and take a DNA test purely out of curiosity, just to find out, knowing that there could be some rocky seas afterwards?
Well, I'm a big fan of not hiding. And I think that if I've learned anything from this is the secrets carry energy. And who figured when, the statement, the truth shall set us free. Indeed, it does. I subconsciously knew something was out of sync my entire life. As a matter of fact, who has enough brain? 51 businesses. Who has enough brain? You ever met anyone that created 51 businesses?
Probably a couple, but only because I have interviewed so many people. But it's incredibly rare. Incredibly rare.
Well, and so that's glorified. All my lean startup work and it was amazing. I'm very proud of it. But I'm just saying, there's some daddy issues in there. Somebody's trying to earn love and prove themselves. And now as I've got to the other side of this, it's just not necessary anymore. It's like I've got contempt and stability. And so, I think that if you have questions and concerns, there's several ways. If I was standing, I'd go hide under the table. Here we are hiding, I think that's how most people live their life. But I'd encourage you to live your life fierce with reality. Face your demons. Go down the throat of the dragon and deal with it. And that's how we actually end up getting really peace. Those DNA screens have a big flashing red warning that everyone clicks pass. And I think it's a crazy number. It's like 1 in 6, 1 in 7 unattributed parentage. And so this is getting a lot more, not the donor conception part. That was a pretty wild surprise. But it is not uncommon. And our roots and origins really do matter. I've been asked a lot, James, what do I do if we're considering donor conception? Wonderful, amazing. Life is so incredible. Look, my life, was it immoral? No. Was it, all these things. It's like, look at the amazing life and my children and my grandchildren that kiss me and love me and the good I've been able to do. I'm very, very proud of what my life's become. But it does carry energy when we hold secrets. And so I think it is important, if you're going to give life and bring life, is to have a plan and set it up and do it in integrity and honesty. Don't hold a bunch of secrets.
So it's even if you're the parents, keeping a secret might be very well intentioned from your kids, that it's not necessarily about when you tell them. It's about making sure that you do it with integrity, do it with the right people.
Yeah. And, growing up in the 60s, I spent half my childhood in the or teenage years, at least, stuffing the coat locker in the garbage can. It's like, I'm so glad my parents didn't, bring that out into public, or I would have taken permanent residency up in the coat locker. So I think we've got to be careful in timing. In my situation, it was good, but I always fundamentally knew. I bet you've never met anyone, before their children were conceived, they began writing in a journal saying, I'm your father, I love you, can count on me, and write all the way through childhood. I did that with all 5 of my children.
I'm the only other person who's done that. Yeah. How interesting is that? I only have 2 kids, and they're 5 and 3 years old, but the 6 months before our first child was born, I began writing a letter to her and a daily journal for myself.
That is beautiful. And the precious nature of that will be, such a lasting impact. It is. In my situation, I needed my children, consciously or subconsciously. I knew. Most of the time we know a lot more than we say that we know. And, in this new, this new, Buddha Zen rich that everyone says, a lot of people are confused, because it's I think my success rate would have been so much higher if I had maybe calmed it down and operated in flow rather than the force I was in the early 50 businesses. And it's not until we truly get in tune with ourselves and know who we really are and set a proper framework with ourselves. We do it with our businesses. I've talked a lot about doing it with our families, but we have also got to do it for ourselves. We've got to get a structure or an hour or something where every day we can go through kind of like a little framework so that we can get ourselves calmed and in tune and in congruency with ourselves.
You mentioned the importance there of identifying what the dragons are and how much energy that keeping secrets can take away from you. Not to mention chronic illness, a whole host of autoimmune conditions. There's more and more data coming out about that, which is really, really interesting. So, question I wanted to ask you, knowing that facing personal dragons is such a key theme of your work, how can someone start identifying and making peace with the dragons in their life?
I think the first thing is to calm it down a little bit and look what's driving you. Most of my life I'd done the right thing, but are you doing the right thing for the right reason? So look at what's really driving and where's the really juice and energy. Then slow down, take a walk, do some meditation, sit on the ocean and just kind of think about it a little bit, but kind of look what's driving me. And am I driving it, or is it driving me? And as much as I glorify, I was an addict. You're an addict. We all are. We're all masking and covering many of the wounds that we have in our life. I just happened to not be a heroin addict. My addiction was glorified. I was a business creation addict. It was pretty cool. But on the other hand, it's like, was it really? At what point I'm having to earn my love and proving my love? And I got exceptionally good at doing that. But my hit was only as good as the next business I'd created. And maybe there's something beyond that, the richness and integrity of our relationships. And most importantly, the relationship we generate with ourselves. Being okay with ourselves, laughing at our own bad jokes. Maybe that's a deeper level than even succeed. And I'm not saying don't do the businesses, but you entrepreneurs, I can speak to you because I'm your king. You're the most functional, unfunctional people in the world. So let's get back a little bit whole, a little bit more grounded. And I think it's just going to get more crazy with all the noise and jitter and the rapid, intense cycles that we go through in media and stop hitting us. We've got to take time to slow it down and find out who we really are and what our real soul purpose is.
So you believe the biggest thing that people are struggling with these days is just how fast, and obviously there's a lot of information that's coming in, that more and more information at a faster and faster rate, which means we lose track of who we are. We lose that sense of stillness that we can have within.
I don't think that that's the very core issue, but I think that is a symptom of the issue. Yeah. I think we've got to slow it down, get in touch with ourselves. I think fundamentally the big issue we're facing right now is one of deep loneliness and isolation. I think the very core family unit, the concept of a deep community or tribe, has been ripped apart at the fabric. And that's left us all feeling very vulnerable. The reason we're having this political nightmare we are, And I'm sorry, I'm kind of like Buddhist in the middle way, balanced middle way. So I don't care, honestly, if it's a left or right, but both are using it. It's better to go fight and scream and yell and be angry at them, but be part of something than stand alone. And if we have our community, if we have our tribe, if we have our, just even a tender few people that we feel connected to, then actually maybe we can take a breath and, to quote my mentor, Stephen Covey, seek first to understand, then to be understood. We're not doing a lot of that these days.
Yeah, I learned that at business school in 2012. One of my favorite all-time quotes. I think it's absolutely brilliant. Seek first to understand, then be understood.
Yeah.
There's a lot of entrepreneurial-minded people, middle-aged men in particular, taking their own lives due to the complexity of the world and various other factors.
Yeah.
What do you think we can do to help those people in particular? And obviously, there's massive ramifications for the mental health challenges on the family and friends who were left behind.
Well, I think it goes right back to this very root core issue of loneliness and of actually identifying who we really are and having deep connection. The deepest need that we have as humans is to be seen and to be heard, but also the greatest terror that we have is someone will actually see those inner recesses of who we are. So isn't that interesting? It's both sides. So we've got to create safe places that we can actually do that. I've been teaching this concept, my dear brother Scott Ford and I kind of came up with this model, but cycle of force, cycle of flow. And I think what it boils down to is individually, when you understand what your values are, when you have your family values in alignment and understand, most people have never thought to do that in their family, but your family values, then business values. We all do that. We put our fancy pants on and we come here and we act like we know. I'm doing it right now. You're doing it right now. We're all like, we know it all. Here we are. We're talking so intelligently. And so we do that publicly good. But then are we using our wealth? And I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about time, emotional resources, and physical resources. And where we put our resources is our wealth. Wealth does not mean money. It means we are well. Emotionally, mentally, spiritually, physically well. At what point all the values are in alignment, then we're able to operate a life of flow. Most people don't do that. Privately, they're off here in a hidden hell. And I don't judge. I mean, I'm very open about, some of the addictions that I had, and they're not always bad. Mine was business creation, but it's no different than a lot of others. So at what point that's out of alignment, we can fake all that we want, this public stuff, but we're going to live this forcey, chunky up and down. Do you know that 70% of all wealth is lost by the second generation, 90% by the third? That's just a systemic problem that we have a cycle of force going on, and we're not passing on the true root of what really matters to our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. We're not passing on our values. And the core precipice of like rites of passage and these key precipice things that allows a platform of stability.
Very interesting. What about those who are in a family where they feel like they're haunted by generational curses or trapped in that poverty cycle?
Yeah. Well, I think it's more than poverty cycle. I think even very, very, I've worked with, many of the very wealthy families, and it's not just poverty in money of wealth. It's poverty again in values. And as you had intonated earlier, epigenetics is a real thing, and science is proving it. The sins of the father pass to the children for the seventh generation. We've heard that over and over. And indeed, that's true. And so if at what point we do our own personal work, we're able to release that and release from bondage our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. And that typically takes a very, very courageous change agent. In my instance, it was my mother that broke a cycle of, abuse and dependency and just really horror. And then I kind of picked up and have carried it forward. But my children, grandchildren, I've done a lot of that work now. And I don't think they're going to have to carry some of these deep traumas. So again, do you hide under the table and cower from these hard things? Or do you just put it out there and face it? And it's going to be clunky. But have the courage to face your demons and your dragons. Don't hide from it.
We'll be back with the show shortly. I've got a quick question for you. Are you living up to your potential? It's a question that shapes your family, your business, and your overall happiness every single day. That's why I'm excited to introduce the Win the Day quiz. Head over to winthedayquiz.com right now, answer a few thought-provoking questions, and you'll instantly discover how well you're performing relative to your true potential. And here's the exciting part for our Win the Day family. As a fan of the show, you'll receive a personalized and absolutely free free action plan to help you win the day every day. Now, just imagine how transformational the results will be when you consistently show up as the best version of yourself in every aspect of your life. Don't miss out. Take the Win the Day quiz now by visiting winthedayquiz.com or click the link in the show notes. All right, let's get back to the show. You've mentioned a couple of times today about your addiction being business. At the same time, you have moved that onto your kids. So when they were, I think it was 14 years old, Garrett said you had each of your kids start a business. So can you take us into that experience?
Yeah. Well, actually, it's when they're 16, and we put a platform called the Legado Family Framework in. I was never going to talk about this, actually. It was a very private thing, and Garrett found out and started pulling it out of me. Actually, it's the model that we use in our family, but we put a platform of values. Anything that endures requires symbols, logos, spirit animals, colors. You know, we see it in universities, or we see it in business or United States or whatever. Symbols, tradition, and doctrine. And a lack of doctrine, you end up with a bunch of rules, and that always breaks down. And then we put in place these rites of passage, and I think that that's what you're referring to. And rites of passage, if we understand our values, permanently cements behavior. A lot of this ancient rites of passage was lost in the Industrial Revolution, and I've injected it back deeply into our family. And so the critical ages, if you're at home, you're going to want to write these ages down, because this pretty important ages. 8 is when the skull closes, kids become self-governing with pineal gland. 12 is an age where puberty. 14 is when most kids make decisions of where they go. 16 is the age and course of like career and direction. And then 18, every son must kill his father, and every daughter must cut the atrium strings from their mother, or else they'll be very dysfunctional. So we put rites of passage in each one of those critical ages in our family, and I've been working with a lot of particularly like family offices and wealthy families to help them do the same. So did you want me to share a little bit about those?
I would love to. Yeah, tell us more. I have so many questions on all this. I have questions related to how you essentially mentor kids to start businesses. I have questions about what are some examples of some of these rites of passage and other rituals and things as well. So take it wherever you want. The floor is yours.
Great. Maybe what I do is should go back and state how the problem began and how it kind of came up with the solution. And then I'd be happy to walk you through, a few of the rites of passage we put in our family, or maybe some others I've worked with. So back early in my career, my wife and I our biggest commitment was not to screw up our kids. And every wealthy family, not wealthy money at that point, had really screwed their family up. And so we were terrified. I was assigned to be the general manager of Mitsubishi Electric's PC division at a young age. And at that point, I was earning more than my father and my wife's father at the end of their career. And so our brilliant solution of how to solve the problem was to move to a very poor neighborhood and never tell our children. Stupid idea. And I had a friend that came to me a couple of years later and says, I've seen you do stupid things, Rich, and really stupid things, but this tops the list. Because if you hide it, which you will not hide it, but if you do, you've just instantly destroyed your grandchildren. It's like, oh my gosh, you're right. So I went on this deep search for a model that would actually help, provide the stability in the platform. And what I found was a lot of like financial stuff, like family offices and wills and trusts and financial instruments, but nothing that provided the platform. So at that point, I was being mentored by Stephen Covey. He was dear to me, and I went and said, "What are you? There's nothing here." And he said, "Well, there's family mission statements." And so we went down that path, and then he encouraged me to actually set up a framework. And so that's actually the framework that we ended up setting up. And that's how this kind of came to be. So I'll quickly jump to the fourth pillar. The platform is values, and then equal to the values of what you throw away, epigenetically, what you throw away. In our family, both my wife and I, it was guilt and shame with some good scarcity, peanut butter sandwich. You could get any behavior you wanted. And so my wife and I decided we were throwing guilt, shame, and scarcity into the garbage can, removing it from the family dynamic. And then we had a platform of 8 or 9 values that we put in place. Then we put symbols. What's the doctrine? Mantras, mottos, mission statements, ethos, family songs, stuff like that. Traditions, cadences of tradition, both short-term and then the big, important long ones that align to the values, and then these rites of passage. So I'll jump now into the rites of passage, which is the fourth pillar that sits on top of it, and 8. So our 8 is great date. And at that age, it's just a simple thing, but we'd let our kid pick where they went for dinner when they got done. By the way, I have all 5 sons. And so they picked dinner. Normally it was some terrible, awful place, but then we'd go private and we'd have a conversation about sex openly. We'd talk about bowling. We'd talk about technology and open the dialogue and never in shame ever close it. So anything that was going on, you name it, even in teenagers, my kids were talking to me about it. 12-year-old, the value that rooted to the 12-year-old trip was, which again, this is when they're entering, puberty and becoming in my son's case, a man. I'd take them on a 3-week trip. The first week we'd go do something incredibly fun, like Great Wall of China or Shanghai or Taj Mahal, or my 4th son, the Pokemon Center in Japan, and just deeply bond and have a life experience. The second week, we would end up in Nepal, typically, holding the little lost girls that had been rescued from sexual slavery. Or even worse, a lot of those little girls' their organs are harvested. And so for a week, touch and deeply bond with humanity as a 12-year-old. And then the third week would come back very, very slowly and acclimate back into society and talk about what does it mean to be a Christiansen man. And in our purview, again, my values aren't your values, so you can't steal mine. You got to decide what yours were. But in our case, what it meant to be a Christiansen man is we protect, we provide safe space for women and children to fully manifest who they are, and we fix a lot of shit. And so that just became the mantra. So if I'm taking on a trip, providing dad, my son gets in a fight protecting a kid and says, protecting dad. So we had this model of how we behaved as Christiansen men. And also, there was no entitlement. That was called the non-entitlement trip. There's no entitlement. Are you kidding me? My kids, no cell phone problems. They'd held these little lost girls at 12 years old. They understood exactly the plight of humanity. At 14 years old, this was known as the public victory, the private victory. And so my wife and I together would take our sons on top of a major world mountain peak. 3 times up the throat of Mount Everest, Kalapatar staring up the throat of Everest, Kilimanjaro, Mont Blanc, Pichu. Hard thing. My sons would cry themselves to the top of the mountain and then know that they can do hard things and they can do it in private. I wanted the power inside here. My worst nightmare was to have my sons throw the winning touchdown and be carried off the crowd's shoulders. I didn't want that. I wanted internal power, and it really did work. So that was the 14-year-old trip, is public victories, or private victories, not public victories, and we can do hard things. So that was the 14-year-old trip, and I think the one you referred to is 60. At 16, each of my sons would shake my hand and agree never to ask for anything again. As a matter of fact, they would pay for their own college, the car when they got back from their mission. They would pay for their college, and they'd pay for our family vacations. And in return, I'd help them build a business. And so each of my sons indeed did build a $1 million business when they were 16 years old and employed most of their friends. My second son did it twice, actually, and he's done it twice following. So really put them in this ability of taking accountability and career and what their interests in a deep skill when they were young. Then when they're 18, we do this remarkable thing again. At 18, every son must kill their father. And I just want it done on the pickleball court, or I want it done on Frisbee golf, not in real life. So at that point, we'd shut the business down and retain enough for them to pay for themselves when they got back, and then give the rest to a charity, typically the one they went to when they're 12. And then at that point, probably the hardest of all rites of passage is each of my sons would go away for 2 years, learn another language, and deeply serve humanity. And when they come back, they are totally my peer. They are 100% my peer. And it's been beautiful, spectacular. I ask advice more from my sons than they do from me. My big third son, Nathan, he's, Matthew too. I saw him last week and they grab me and he shakes me around and kisses me on the forehead. My son Matthew wants to play pickleball with me all the time, or invites me to, fantasy. And so it's developed this beautiful, rich, vibrant, incredible relationship and dynamic now with my amazing 5 sons. So that's the model that we followed with rites of passage. And I told mine, but equally as cool. I worked with this amazing couple out in New Zealand. And I guess that their great-great-grandfather had been on this little island and been saved from the cannibals 3 times at this rock. And so it was like a sacred place for their family. So when their kids would turn 14, I won't even tell you what they do when they're 16. They tattooed part of the symbol on their arms. Pretty cool. But when they were 14, they'd get the kid, and mom would get in the front of a canoe, put the child in the middle, father in the back, and they would paddle across shark-infested waters to this island for an hour. And then they get to that special island, and they go to the very rock where the grandfather was saved. And the mom would put her hand on one rock, put the child in the middle, hand on the father or the right, and then put the hand and give that child a special blessing, call down the powers of heaven that they could also be saved from the cannibals. They'd have a remarkable experience in their life. You know what that did to that kid? They then put the kid, the 14-year-old, in the front of the canoe and allow them to paddle across that channel back through the sharks to safety. You've never met that family, but you know what that 14-year-old's like. You know the impact they're going to have. So frequently, we get so busy, caught up. Here's what we do.
Yeah.
It's
different
so
than playing
easy.
video games all day.
We don't do the hard thing. We're not deliberate with putting the rooting of experiences, even the cadences of traditions, down into the values. We're not deliberate with it. And the result is forgive me for swearing, but it's a shit show. It really is. And we wonder why families are disintegrating in the lack of having symbology and identity. Our kids go follow a sports team because they don't have a logo. We have a logo. First thing my grandkids do when they come to our house is they go like that, because that means Grandpa loves you more than that. I'm not going to knock your mic over. Second thing, they will get a treat. And then they go to the family logo and they say, Grandpa, my wife and the son are protected in white, and I surround her to provide that safe space. And then my sons each point in and they go and touch their little place on the logo. They have a color. If I don't get them their toy or their wrapping color in their color, they know it. As a matter of fact, my little granddaughter Everly came up to me 2 weeks ago. Grandpa, I need to change my color. I'm changing my color from hot pink to fuchsia pink. No, I couldn't tell the difference, but we'll let her do it because, again, what's the ultimate human need? It's to be seen. And so for a child to be able to say, I fit there, I belong, I can manifest, I'm seen, what power does that bring? We're losing so many of these critical bonding elements. And if we don't get them, I don't care how many dang businesses you create. I don't, James. I'm the king again. I've done it 51 times. It didn't fill my bucket fully. It requires deep bonding on the family level. Yes, do the public stuff, but also take care of your own internal stuff. Get your own internal house in order, and then that will actually make the family so much better too. All right, end of lecture 5,439.
When the kid is 8 and you're taking them around the world, is that just...
That's 14.
14, so
12.
The Great Wall of China one, when was that?
12.
That's 12. So
because
is that
my
just
sons are becoming men at that point. It's just me and my son.
just the two of you?
Just the two of us to deeply bond. And the result is when my son has their first wet dream, they come and talk to me. You mentioned Garrett, but one of Garrett claims his funniest moments in life is when my son, Tim, we wrote this book, Even If Your Toes Were Purple, the Raising Confident Teenagers Who Are Powerful and Stand Out. And my son, Tim, went down my throat like you can't even imagine on the topic of sex, and non-ashamedly, because he'd grown up in communication conversation. So 8 is great date where dialogue's open. 12, and again, you can't copy me. You got to figure your own values out and then figure your own rites of passage, but you got to have them, because if you don't have them, someone else is going to create it. It's just you want the Bloods to do it. You want the Crips to do it because they're doing it. You want the LA Lakers. I don't know. I kind of like the LA Lakers, but you want them defining your values and your family culture. I don't. So in the absence of doing that, they're going to find these things. We're tribal animals. The symbol shows I belong here. I mean, if you drive a Subaru, it says something a lot different than if you drive a Ford 454 4-barrel 4-car Ford, you know. So these symbols really, really matter. And I don't want other people controlling my values and where we fit. So get your symbols, get your traditions, make sure they align to your values. Coming to Thanksgiving, most people's tradition is have Thanksgiving dinner, watch football, have a great big fight, repeat, rewind next year. Terrible tradition. So define one that supports the values.
So interesting. Plus all the other things that come across with that. Obviously, you get self-acceptance, you get a lot more intention, you get the value of doing hard things so you can grow. So many things that are really powerful. When it comes to a business at the age of 16, what are some questions that you're saying with these? There'll be a lot of parents listening to this saying, amazing, I'd love my teenager to go and start a business. I don't even know where to begin. So what approach have you taken through?
I wrote zigzag principles, so it was just natural to me. And we were a weird family. We weren't talking sports. We were, from the time my kids were 5 years old, we were running Porter models and dissecting channels, and that was the conversation around the business at the dinner table. So the recommendation I give is don't feel like you have to force and again be me, but if you're a dentist, you got to have someone clean your office. Give your kid the chance and opportunity to do that. Enable and cheat code it. Whatever opportunity there is, give an opportunity for your kid to start and be exposed and take self-accountability and not only accountability, to have consequences. So many parents just don't give their kids consequences. And you know what? When your kid's 5 years old and they hit another kid, let them have the consequence and go to timeout. Don't wait until they're 22 years and they get to go to jail for it. And for heaven's sakes, if they're 22 years old and do it, let them go to jail and not 28 and go to prison. So we got to give our kids learning experiences of natural consequence.
Especially when it's young and it's
when they're
consequence is small rather
Let
than...
them lose $5. I mean, one of my favorite stories on this is my son. They saved $10 up for Disneyland, or $20, whatever it was. And first gas stop, he went and bought Cheetos and a big gulp and just, And so the whole trip, he's like, oh, I want that hot. Well, where's your money? Oh, well, I spent... He learned the lesson. He never did that again. Let him learn it at 8 rather than 18. And so many parents helicopter and lawn mow. Let's not do that. Let's give them real, rich, deep grounding experiences. One other thing I do want to say on here is I keep referring to is if you have a really good ethos and you know what your family values are and you know what you stand for, you're not going to need a bunch of rules. If you're in a family, you're generating a bunch of rules, you got a terrible ethos. You've totally missed the point. You don't need it. You just don't need a bunch of rules if you have a really, really good value system that the kids how to self-govern. Any institution that endures requires symbols to identify. They need the doctrine or the ethos to say, how do we govern and self-modulate here? And then they need traditions to return to the tribe, come around the tribe and, gather as cavemen or whatever else and feel safe. And so those three elements are critical in any institution that endures, whether it's a university, a football team, a government, and especially a family.
How does someone get clear on what values are important to them?
Well, I got a really fun. As a matter of fact, I think one of the gifts that we're going to be giving is I knew we were having this conversation, is I'm going to give you the first segment of this value process. And so I'll give you a couple little hints, but at the end, hopefully we can pop that in and give everyone, give the value section. And we charge like $600 for this. And so we're going to give that away to you for free. So what I like to do is first of all, is what you and your wife fundamentally say, this is what we're trying to do in our marriage. Then I never look at things short. I like to look at 7th-generation thinking, learn from their equation. So look back to your ancestors. What really good things did you learn and gather from your ancestors, and what did they stand for? And then look 3 generations forward. What do you, not your kids, we're always too critical in trying to help our kids, but grandkids, great-grandkids, what's the greatest gift you could give to them? That gives a pretty clue on values. And then equally, what do you remove? We always talk about this platform we build. Equally important is, what are we throwing away? Guilt and shame and scarcity were things that we had to throw away. So what are yours? And so the same thing, what really negative things came in, and have the courage to talk about it. On my mother's side of the family, there was a lot of addiction and even abuse that took place. We had to get that out. So identify those and say, we're getting rid of those things. Now, here's the kicker is when you're a partner or significant other and you don't agree on things. And that's a really fun one. Focus on what you do agree on and build on the platform of what you do agree of, and just ignore the rest. And pretty soon, just like if we take this little cup of water and a snot ball falls in it, and a really gross falls in it. What some people do is take and pick and pick and pick at it, and pretty soon the whole thing gets polluted. The best thing to do is actually take more water and just pour it in, and the snot ball will fall out, and it may make a little mess on your carpet, but at least we're not having to drink it. And so in the instance of values, if there's a fundamental misalignment, go to the 7 or 8 and build on what you do agree, because guess what? You're ahead of 99.999% of the populations which haven't got any values that they're agreed on. It's remarkable how you can create a company with a logo and have your values defined, but you haven't even thought, most people have not even thought to do this in their marriage, their most significant relationship at all, or their individual ethos.
Yeah, I love the way that you put so much structure and formalize all of this stuff.
Yeah.
I think it's really,
Well,
the moment Garrett said this during our podcast, I was like, oh my God, I have a lot of things that we do as a family, but it's not even close to having the structure and formalization that you've spoken about. That's why I find it so
And I
interesting.
think that's finally why because I was going to keep this really, really quiet. Garrett kind of actually tricked me a little bit to get it out. He did. You'll have to ask him that on the next time, but he tricked me to get it out. But then I just realized I had this profound spiritual experience that, families are disintegrating. The very core of what society is disintegrating. If we don't get this right, it's not going to end pretty.
Yeah.
And so, it's the best that I have to offer. But the great thing is it was 30 years of practice and proven model. And it's been astounding, amazing to see what others have been able to, and actually, I think a lot more thoughtful and deliberate and fun than mine.
Yeah.
Ben Greenfield, I was one of the people, I'm sure you know him. He came up the cab and we did it. And I mean, he's taken to a whole next level. It's like every time I see his update, it's like, oh my gosh, you're killing me here, Ben.
And obviously the other spouse that you have, your marriage partner is a huge piece of the puzzle here. What's the most important thing to look for in a potential spouse?
Well, I actually was a ecclesiastical leader of about 700 kids over 5 years. And so I'd give them 5 pieces of advice in the significant other. First of all, are you emotionally compatible? The most important. Do you laugh together? Do you cry together? That's critically important. And by the way, this is the same advice I give my son. So look for emotional compatibility. The second is intellectually compatibility. If you want to be a truck driver and your significant other wants to be a PhD, probably got a little misalignment there. And you don't have to be interested in the same things, but learn to, if you're going to be smart together, be smart together. If you're going to be stupid together, agree to be stupid together. So intellectual compatibility is number 2. Number 3 is financially compatibility. Number 1 reason for most divorces is it's not these other things, it's financial compatibility. So that's the 3rd pillar. I'm trying to remember. I remember the 5th pillar, so maybe I'll jump to that and see if I can come up to that. It's always the big one. It's sexually compatible. You got to make sure you're hot for each other, because that's a beautiful part of life and a rich part of life. And most couples start only with that, and really encourage slow that one down and build to these other powers. Let's see if I can pull it back. Intellectually compatible, emotionally compatible, financially compatible, and spiritually compatible. I raised a beautiful little Sherpa daughter, a little Buddhist daughter. And you don't see a lot of individuals with different belief systems it working out. And so it's really, really wise to get someone who's on the same spiritual plane. It's typically really exciting, like when if you're of the Jewish faith and you marry a Hindu. That's really exciting and dicey. But then what do you do when the children come along? What do you do?
I've seen that with some of my friends, about like different religions and things. And you get married because you love each other. You have all that compatibility that you mentioned, but we never spoke about what school or baptism or anything like that, or any rituals of any other religion.
Well, and it causes all sorts of conflict in this other platform. And so the traditions particularly get a lot of conflict. So you see a lot of conflict when you get like a Buddhist trying to marry a Christian, or I'm science only, atheist marrying a Christian. Do you teach them science, or do you God, Father, Holy Ghost baptize them, So I just really encourage spiritual compatibility, emotional compatibility, financial compatibility, spiritual compatibility, intellectual compatibility, and sexual compatibility. And upon those 5 pillars, you've got a pretty good, strong starting spot.
Love it.
First time I've ever been asked that in the interview. How about that?
Nice. Setting records. How do you balance the hunger for future achievements with happiness in the present?
Well, I think that as I've got we were talking about that as I came in, as a younger man, appetite was insatiable because I was so eager to earn my brass stripes and prove I was the man. I think when you get to the top of that mountain, David Brooks wrote this beautiful book called The Second Mountain. And when you get to the top of that, quite frankly, I've climbed it a bunch of times. It's like eating Krispy Kreme donuts. It doesn't fill your soul. It's a great sugar buzz, but it actually doesn't sustain and fill you. What does is the second mountain, and that's doing good, particularly if you do it in privacy, legacy kind of stuff and legacy work and impact. And I've been fortunate enough to do a fair amount of that. But I think there's a third element, and that is the maybe what I would say is the hidden high plateau. And that is one of actually being okay with yourself and liking yourself and laughing at your own bad jokes, as I'd referenced earlier, and just manifesting who you truly, really are, non-scripted. What you're getting today isn't a lot of ego. It's a lot much different Rich than it was 10 years ago. And I think sometimes wisdom and age does that to us, but maybe also a few of these complicated life situations we all get to navigate. And tragically, many don't use that as the catalyst to actually enact change and move to the other side, because it's hard. I just went through it. I mean, my earth completely came apart with this thing. I stopped all operations to get this figured out. But you know what? By facing it, going towards it, and then getting clear, then a peace and resolve and calmness comes in our soul that we can speak with more authority. And then we turn, I hope that I get to model, God willing, I get to model my mentors of Dr. Horn and Alan Hall and Stephen Covey, and then become a sage, showing up in true wisdom without an agenda and not ego operating. And I think that's the joy we get to when we maybe get through some of these complicated life experiences.
What's so interesting is that people are running, but very few people end up running in the right direction back to who they are. And I feel like that's what your whole life has been running. Yeah. And it seems like in the final chapter, in terms of where we are today, you've been able to run back exactly to who you are. And it's provided you this level of peace and presence. And obviously your whole life has been about contribution, but it seems like you've created a much safer space for yourself to be able to do that work.
Most of my life, I've done the right thing. Most of my life, I've done the right thing. Very few things can I say I've done the wrong thing. A few, maybe. But I haven't always done the right thing for the right reason. And now, right thing, right reason. And I think when we show up for an integrity with ourselves, it gives us the rocket fuel and the model. Because do I want my beautiful little grandson Rockwell not showing up what he authentically really is and trying to conform to some pre-scripted paradigm of maybe the Utah Jazz or the LA Lakers? Heaven's not the blood or the Crips, but maybe better for what he really was put on this earth to do. So when we show up in real integrity to ourselves, then we're able to get a life of flow, non-interrupted, with value congruency all the way through. And I faked it pretty good. I did. But it hasn't been until the last couple of years that I can actually say I've kind of turned a little bit into this, like, well, my friends just say Rich is like 1/3 mystic, 1/3 monk, and 1/3 Mormon. I don't know. I think it's kind of an accurate description, but I don't care, because I just get to authentically show up and be okay. Be okay. Even this book tour I did was really complicated. Some really hard questions. But the best I can do is deliver genuinely what I'm seeing and feeling. And I think by doing that, we give permission to others to show up authentically. And then we start solving some of the bigger problems rather than putting sugar icing on top with the real problem. And we got some pretty big problems right now in society.
Yes.
So let's solve them, not put cookie dough over top of them.
If you could make one change to the education system, what would it be?
Oh, well, I just got off the board of higher education, and there's some pretty broken issues with it, honestly, because we've got to have structures that learn and teach us. I think that there's a lot of people that, just want to throw all these structures away. Then what are you going to do? Wander through the wilderness with the rattlesnakes and the scorpions and the poisonous plants? It's like, that's a stupid idea too. But we certainly have to change the structure. And I think for an educational system, it really has to be a student-led, interest-led, not academic lecturing, but allow the interest. So it has to come, I think, more from the individual and their skills and attributes. And I think we're seeing some progress on there, but certainly not as fast as I'd like to see it.
Last question before the rocket round. On your best day, what's an affirmation that you would write on a flashcard that you could show yourself on your worst day?
Oh, I think that's actually something I really do. It's I love you. It's just simply, I love you, and I got you. I've spent a lot of time because my childhood was very traumatic. And so it's like, I got you, little buddy. I'll oftentimes say that when I see my worst self or my shadow animal coming out, which is oftentimes the traumas of my younger child, I'll just, underneath my thing, I'll just take a couple of deep breaths and say, I got you, buddy. We got this.
So interesting. We had, Keith Ferrazzi, he wrote Never Eat Alone, amazing book. And he spoke about, when I asked him that question recently, and he said, there's always a place inside you can go to be okay. And it seems like it's a very similar message to what you're talking about there.
Well, I think each of us have inside of ourselves. I've done a great job of protecting my children, not so much myself. Keep hitting that microphone. I'll pull that back a little. But we each of us have a child, a little 5-6-year-old, where most of our trauma occurs. We got a rousty teenager. We got a young adult that's tried to figure it all out, and then an adult trying to manage them all. And oftentimes when we get acting up or behaving or negative internal dialogue, it's because of an unmet need of our light child. So I really like looking, what is your shadow self? And getting comfortable with that. I've learned to embrace my dark sides and my seethy sides and my negative sides as much as I do my positive Richie's app side. And maybe it's healing is actually embracing brokenness as an integral part of who we are and accepting that.
Mm-hmm. Let's now move into the Win the Day rocket round. 10 questions for some quick answers. You up for this one, Rich?
All right, let's do it.
Number one, what quote inspires you the most?
Right now, I've been quoting Oliver Wendell Holmes. For this side of, let's see if I can get this right. I would not, for this side of success, I would not give a fig. For this side of simplicity, I would not give a fig. For simplicity, on the side of complexity, for that, I would give my life.
Love it. Number two, morning coffee or evening wine?
Oh, neither. Good, healthy, clean water.
Number three, what's one bit of advice you would give your 18-year-old self?
Just chill. It's going to be okay. Take a deep breath. It's all okay.
Number four, what book do you gift the most, or what book contributed most to the mindset you have today?
Stephen Covey has 7 Habits of Highly Effective, definitively evolved. And I've been giving Ryan Holiday's Stillness is the Key book out a lot recently.
Mm-hmm. Number five, was there a vulnerability you once hid within that became your superpower?
No, I think that's what we've talked about, is just trusting my inner knowing and not having to show up disingenuously.
Mm-hmm. Number six, what's one thing you've learned about failure?
Oh, fail efficiently. Mm-hmm. Don't be afraid to fail, just fail efficiently. Everyone quotes my...
That's a good book title, actually. Well, fail efficiently.
I've founded 51 businesses. Everyone quotes the 16 multimillion-dollar businesses, but I've failed 19 times. So just guardrail it and fail efficiently. Mm-hmm. Be okay with failure.
I think it's great. Number seven, if you could sit on a park bench and have a conversation with someone alive or dead, who would it be?
It would be my biological father, Doc. Never got to meet him, and I would pay $100,000 right now to have 1 hour conversation with my biological father.
Mm-hmm. Number eight, what tool or resource best helps you run your life or business?
For business, I use what's called the 5-minute whiteboard as a way to really efficiently prioritize so you're doing the important things, and it's been the key tool. And then in private life critical decisions, I came up with a model called Value Decision Matrix. And that's the tool primarily to make critical decisions and get clarity in life.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. We'll see if we can overlay that and we can put that on.
It's on my website. It's free on my website. Finally put it up there.
Incredible. Number nine, share one thing on your bucket list. I know you've done a lot already.
Oh, man. I know. I've got the coolest freaking life. I'm trying to get my body back healthy and strong enough to go do coast to coast in England. I want to do coast to coast or West Coast Trail.
Awesome. And last question, number 10, what's one thing you do to win the day?
Win the day is breath work. Do breath work. If you do 5 minutes, 10 minutes of breath work, you'll get clarity and you'll know what you really need to do.
There is a huge lack of intentional breath in the world we're in today. It's crazy, right? Especially when we're seeing a lot of this pain manifest, like non-structural pain that people are experiencing that can be alleviated, not to mention stress as well, just from intentional breath.
Well, I think that also clarity of what you need to do. I've chaired a lot of boards, and when I'm in a real sticky situation, I'll actually sit there and I'll do some deliberate breathing, and we instantly can come back to clarity. If we just slow it down, get out of our limbic brain, get into our frontal cortex, and most people spend 98% of their time stirring here, get to frontal cortex. The best way that I've found to do it, practice that I found, is deliberate breath work.
Mm-hmm. So good. Well, there are a bunch of ways to connect with Rich, and we'll link to all of these in the show notes. You can follow him on Instagram at richchristian_. Visit his website, richchristiansen.com, and grab a copy of his new book, BlindSighted, on his website or on Amazon. Again, all that and more will be linked in the show notes. Rich, what a pleasure, my friend. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining me on another episode of the Win the Day podcast. We want to hear your thoughts on what we covered today, so drop a comment on the YouTube version of this episode with your favorite takeaway, any questions you have, or what actions you'll be taking as a result of what was shared in this episode. And if you found value in the Win the Day podcast, leave a 5-star rating on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You'll find a link to both of those in the show notes. It'll only take you a few seconds, and more ratings really helps other people discover the show so they can get the mindset upgrade they need, and we can bring more winners into the Win the Day movement. That's all for this episode. Get out there and win the day. Until next time, onwards and upwards, always.